The morning mist hung low over Cleveland, Ohio in 1859, as 18-year-old John Davison Rockefeller walked through the muddy streets toward his first job at Hewitt & Tuttle, a commission house dealing in grain, hay, and other goods. In his worn leather satchel, alongside his ledger books, lay a small, well-thumbed Bible that had belonged to his mother, Eliza. What most people didn't know was that young Rockefeller had discovered something extraordinary within its pages, a spiritual blueprint that would guide him to become the wealthiest man in American history. Hidden within the 23rd Psalm lay what Rockefeller would later describe in his private journals as the divine code of provision. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. These weren't just comforting words to the ambitious young man from upstate New York. They were strategic principles that would shape his approach to business, crisis management, and wealth building for the next 7 decades. But how does an ancient Hebrew poem become a roadmap to unprecedented prosperity? How did a farmer's son from a modest Baptist family transform biblical wisdom into practical strategies that would revolutionize American industry? The answer lies not in mysticism or supernatural intervention, but in the profound psychological and strategic insights embedded within this sacred text. Have you ever felt like you're working harder than ever, yet prosperity seems to slip through your fingers like sand? Have you wondered why some people seem to possess an unshakable confidence, even when facing seemingly impossible challenges? The secret might be closer than you think, written in plain sight within the pages of the most widely read book in human history. Consider Sarah Martinez, a struggling single mother from Phoenix, Arizona, who discovered these same principles in 2023. Working 3 part-time jobs to support her 2 children, Sarah felt trapped in a cycle of financial stress and exhaustion. Her turning point came during a particularly difficult week when her car broke down, her babysitter quit, and her landlord threatened eviction. Desperate for guidance, she opened an old Bible her grandmother had given her years earlier, landing on the 23rd Psalm. Sarah began to see patterns in the text that mirrored the challenges successful entrepreneurs had faced throughout history. The green pastures weren't just about comfort, they represented strategic rest, the discipline to pace oneself for long-term success, rather than burning out in frantic activity. The still waters symbolize the calm decision-making that comes from having a clear sense of direction and purpose. As Sarah studied Rockefeller's life through library books and online resources, she realized that his success wasn't built on ruthless tactics alone, but on a systematic application of timeless principles. Rockefeller had learned to see business challenges as temporary valleys, market volatility as opportunities for patient acquisition, and wealth as a tool for long-term stewardship, rather than immediate gratification. The Psalm's opening declaration, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," became Rockefeller's mental framework for abundance thinking. Instead of operating from scarcity and fear, he approached every business decision with the confidence that resources would be available when needed. This wasn't blind optimism, but strategic faith backed by meticulous planning and disciplined execution. When Rockefeller entered the volatile oil industry in 1863, he carried this mindset into every negotiation, every partnership, and every expansion decision. While competitors panicked during market downturns, Rockefeller saw opportunities to consolidate. While others made emotional decisions based on fear or greed, he maintained the steady composure described in the Psalm's imagery of peaceful waters and verdant fields. Sarah decided to apply these principles to her own situation. She began viewing her multiple jobs not as desperate measures but as diversified income streams, a modern interpretation of not wanting for provision. She started treating her children's needs not as overwhelming burdens, but as clear priorities that would guide her decision-making process. Within 6 months, Sarah had consolidated her 3 part-time positions into 1 full-time role with better benefits. She used the Psalm's principle of "prepareth a table before me in the presence of mine enemies" to maintain professional dignity, even when facing criticism from former employers who couldn't understand her career transition. The transformation wasn't magical. It was methodical. Sarah had learned to reprogram her mind from survival mode to strategic thinking, from reactive behavior to proactive planning. She discovered what Rockefeller had known instinctively, that true prosperity begins with mental discipline and emotional stability, then manifests through consistent, principled action. The Psalm's final verses, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life," became Sarah's daily affirmation, not as wishful thinking but as a commitment to conduct herself with integrity and long-term vision. Like Rockefeller before her, she learned that sustainable success requires building a reputation for reliability, generosity, and ethical behavior. Today, as you face your own challenges and opportunities, consider this ancient wisdom that guided one of history's most successful entrepreneurs. The same principles that helped a young man from Cleveland build an empire can help you build the life you desire. The question isn't whether these strategies work. Rockefeller's legacy proves their effectiveness. The question is whether you're ready to apply them with the same discipline and faith that transformed a Bible-carrying teenager into America's first billionaire. Tomorrow we'll explore how Rockefeller used the Psalms' imagery of green pastures and still waters to develop the emotional resilience and strategic patience that would carry him through the most turbulent periods of his career. But tonight, consider reading the 23rd Psalm with fresh eyes, seeing not just comfort for troubled times, but a blueprint for lasting prosperity and protection in an uncertain world. The year was 1870, and the oil fields of Pennsylvania resembled a war zone more than a business district. Derricks sprouted from the earth like steel weeds. Black smoke choked the sky, and fortunes were made and lost with each fluctuation in crude prices. In this chaos, 31-year-old John D. Rockefeller sat in his modest Cleveland office methodically reviewing ledgers while his competitors rushed frantically from one crisis to the next. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." These words from his mother's Bible had become Rockefeller's operational philosophy in an industry defined by boom and bust volatility. While others saw the psalm as merely spiritual comfort, Rockefeller recognized it as a master class in strategic patience and emotional regulation, principles that would prove invaluable in building Standard Oil into America's most powerful corporation. The green pastures represented something revolutionary in business thinking, the courage to rest when others were frantically active. Rockefeller understood that sustainable success required periods of strategic withdrawal, careful analysis, and patient planning. When oil prices soared and competitors borrowed heavily to expand rapidly, Rockefeller often pulled back, accumulating cash reserves and studying market patterns. This principle of strategic rest wasn't laziness, it was wisdom. Like a shepherd who knows when his flock needs to graze peacefully to build strength for the journey ahead, Rockefeller recognized that business empires are built during quiet moments of preparation, not in the heat of manic activity. He scheduled daily time for reflection, weekly periods for strategic planning, and annual retreats for long-term vision setting. But what does this ancient wisdom mean for someone facing modern financial pressures? Consider Michael Chen, a software engineer from Seattle, who discovered these same principles during the tech industry downturn of 2023. Working at a startup that demanded 80-hour weeks, Michael felt trapped in a cycle of constant urgency that left no time for strategic thinking about his career or finances. The breaking point came when Michael's company announced massive layoffs despite everyone's frantic efforts. Exhausted and disillusioned, he remembered his grandfather's advice about finding wisdom in unexpected places. That evening, he opened an old Bible and found himself reading the 23rd Psalm, just as Sarah Martinez had done months earlier in Phoenix. Michael began to study how Rockefeller had applied these principles during the volatile early days of the oil industry. He learned that Rockefeller's famous calm during crises wasn't natural temperament. It was cultivated discipline. The industrialist had trained himself to find mental green pastures, even in the most stressful situations, creating spaces for clear thinking when others were paralyzed by panic. The still waters became Michael's framework for decision-making. Instead of reacting immediately to every opportunity or threat, he learned to create periods of calm reflection. When offered 3 different job positions after his layoff, Michael didn't accept the first attractive offer. Instead, he spent a week in what he called still water mode, walking in local parks, journaling about his long-term goals, and analyzing each opportunity against his core values and strategic objectives. This patient approach revealed something crucial. The highest-paying position would have trapped him in the same cycle of unsustainable pressure. The second option offered growth potential, but in a declining industry. The third choice, while initially less attractive financially, positioned him at a company with strong fundamentals and a culture that valued sustainable productivity over frantic activity. Rockefeller had made similar calculations throughout his career. During the railroad wars of the 1870s, when competitors were making desperate alliances and aggressive moves, Rockefeller maintained his strategic patience. He studied the transportation industry, built relationships with multiple railroad companies, and negotiated exclusive shipping rates that gave Standard Oil decisive advantages. His competitors' frantic activity actually weakened their negotiating positions, while his calm persistence secured better deals. Michael's story illustrates how these biblical principles translate into practical career strategy. By creating regular periods for strategic thinking, his personal green pastures, he began to see patterns in the tech industry that his constantly busy peers missed. He noticed emerging trends in artificial intelligence applications, identified companies with sustainable business models, and developed skills that would be valuable regardless of market fluctuations. The still waters principle taught Michael something profound about emotional regulation during uncertainty. Rockefeller had faced countless crises: market crashes, competitor attacks, government investigations, public criticism, yet maintained his strategic focus by cultivating inner calm. He achieved this not through denial or detachment, but by developing unshakable confidence in his fundamental principles and long-term vision. Michael began practicing this during job interviews and salary negotiations. Instead of accepting the first reasonable offer out of fear or desperation, he learned to project the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your true value and having multiple options. This patience paid off when a fourth opportunity emerged, a position that offered not just better compensation, but alignment with his values and genuine growth potential. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was systematic. Michael discovered that the Psalms' pastoral imagery wasn't about avoiding challenges, but about maintaining inner stability while navigating them. Green pastures aren't permanent vacation spots. They're strategic rest stops that restore strength for the journey ahead. Still waters aren't stagnant pools. They're sources of clarity and refreshment that enable wise navigation through turbulent times. Rockefeller's application of these principles created more than personal wealth. It revolutionized American industry. His patient, systematic approach to business development established supply chains, distribution networks, and operational efficiencies that served customers better, while generating unprecedented profits. His strategic rest periods produced innovations in corporate structure, employee relations, and philanthropic giving that influenced business practices for generations. For Michael, adopting these principles meant more than career advancement. It meant reclaiming control over his time, energy, and future direction. He learned to schedule regular green pasture periods for skill development, relationship building, and strategic planning. He created still water moments before important decisions, allowing clarity to emerge rather than rushing toward immediate solutions. As you consider your own career challenges and financial goals, remember that sustainable success requires both action and reflection, both effort and rest. The most successful people throughout history have learned to balance productive activity with strategic patience. They understand that true prosperity flows not from frantic activity, but from consistent application of sound principles over time. Tomorrow we'll explore how Rockefeller applied the Psalms' darkest imagery, the valley of the shadow of death, to navigate the most dangerous period of his career, when government prosecutors, competitor attacks, and public hatred threatened to destroy everything he had built. But tonight, consider creating your own green pastures and still waters, spaces where wisdom can grow and clear direction can emerge. The year 1911 marked the darkest hour in John D. Rockefeller's illustrious career. After decades of building Standard Oil into the world's largest corporation, the United States Supreme Court delivered a devastating blow. The company must be dissolved under antitrust laws. Newspaper headlines screamed accusations of monopolistic practices. Political cartoons depicted him as a ruthless octopus strangling American commerce, and death threats arrived daily at his estate. At 72 years old, facing potential criminal charges and public vilification, Rockefeller found himself walking through what the 23rd Psalm called the valley of the shadow of death. Yet in his private correspondence during this period, Rockefeller displayed remarkable composure. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." These weren't just words of spiritual consolation. They represented a strategic mindset that had carried him through previous crises. and would guide him through this ultimate test of character and resilience. The Valley of the Shadow of Death wasn't merely about facing mortality. It represented the inevitable dark passages that every ambitious person must navigate, moments when everything seems lost, when public opinion turns hostile, when even closest allies begin to distance themselves. Rockefeller had learned that these valleys weren't detours from the path to success. They were integral parts of the journey that revealed true character and separated temporary achievers from lasting leaders. How do you maintain courage when facing seemingly insurmountable opposition? How do you preserve strategic thinking when emotions run high and stakes couldn't be higher? The answer lies in understanding what Rockefeller discovered through decades of applying biblical wisdom to business challenges: that valleys are temporary, shadows aren't substance, and death itself is often rebirth in disguise. Consider Elena Rodriguez, a restaurant owner from Austin, Texas, who faced her own valley in 2023 when a viral social media campaign falsely accused her family business of health code violations. Within days, decades of reputation building evaporated as angry reviews flooded their profiles. Customers canceled reservations and suppliers began demanding immediate payment. Elena's three-generation family restaurant, which had survived the Great Depression and multiple economic downturns, suddenly teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. Elena had grown up hearing stories about her grandfather's faith and resilience, but she had never truly understood their practical application until this crisis struck. Desperate for guidance, she found herself reading the 23rd Psalm and researching how successful leaders had navigated similar dark periods. She discovered Rockefeller's response to the 1911 antitrust case and realized that his calm wasn't based on denial or detachment. It was rooted in a systematic approach to crisis management derived from biblical principles. The rod and staff that comforted the psalmist weren't magical talismans. They were tools of guidance and protection that required active engagement. Rockefeller had understood that during valley experiences, leaders must simultaneously defend their core interests while continuing to move forward with long-term vision. He didn't simply endure the antitrust crisis. He used it as an opportunity to restructure his business empire more efficiently than ever before. Elena began applying these principles immediately. Instead of responding emotionally to the social media attacks, she created what she called her rod and staff strategy. The rod represented active defense. She hired a reputation management firm, gathered documentation proving the false accusations, and methodically responded to legitimate concerns while ignoring malicious attacks. The staff represented forward guidance. She used the crisis as motivation to upgrade her restaurant systems, improve customer service training, and strengthen relationships with loyal patrons who had supported them during the difficult period. Rockefeller's approach during his valley experience revealed the profound psychology behind the Psalm's imagery. He understood that valleys are geographical necessities. You cannot reach the next mountain peak without descending through the low places. Similarly, business and personal growth often require passing through periods of apparent loss, public criticism, or temporary setback. The key was maintaining perspective and continuing purposeful action even when circumstances seemed hopeless. During the antitrust proceedings, Rockefeller demonstrated this principle by continuing his philanthropic work, advancing educational initiatives, and maintaining his commitment to efficient business practices. While lawyers handled legal challenges and public relations professionals managed media concerns, he focused on activities that aligned with his long-term values and vision. This wasn't escape from reality. It was strategic focus on elements within his control. Elena discovered similar power in maintaining forward momentum during her crisis. While addressing the immediate reputation challenges, she simultaneously launched a community outreach program, partnered with local food banks, and began offering cooking classes for low-income families. These activities not only demonstrated her restaurant's genuine commitment to community service, but also generated positive stories that gradually overshadowed the negative publicity. The transformation Elena experienced mirrors what happened to Rockefeller after the Standard Oil dissolution. What initially appeared to be devastating defeat actually positioned him for even greater success. The breakup of Standard Oil into multiple companies increased the total value of his holdings as individual entities became more efficiently managed and investor-friendly. Similarly, Elena's restaurant emerged from its crisis with stronger systems, deeper community relationships, and a more resilient business model. The Psalm's promise, "I will fear no evil," isn't about absence of danger, but about maintaining courage despite legitimate threats. Rockefeller faced real opposition from powerful competitors, government prosecutors, and public opinion. Elena confronted genuine risks to her family's livelihood and legacy. Yet both discovered that fear becomes manageable when channeled into productive action, guided by clear principles. This principle of courage under pressure applies to anyone facing significant challenges in their career, relationships, or personal development. The valley of the shadow of death might manifest as job loss, business failure, health crisis, relationship breakdown, or public embarrassment. In each case, the biblical principle remains consistent. Acknowledge the reality of the danger, maintain faith in ultimate positive outcomes, and continue taking principled action toward long-term goals. Elena's story illustrates how valleys often contain hidden opportunities that wouldn't be visible from mountain peaks. The crisis forced her to examine every aspect of her business operations, resulting in improvements that increased efficiency and customer satisfaction. The negative publicity, while painful, also attracted support from community members who valued authentic local businesses. The financial pressure motivated creative solutions that strengthened the restaurant's long-term sustainability. Rockefeller's legacy demonstrates that valleys don't define destinations. They reveal character and create opportunities for those wise enough to navigate them strategically. His response to the antitrust crisis established patterns of philanthropic giving and social responsibility that influenced American business culture for generations. Rather than becoming bitter or defensive, he used the experience to refine his understanding of stewardship and public service. As you face your own valley experiences, remember that shadows are temporary and death is often transformation in disguise. The same principles that guided Rockefeller through his darkest hour and helped Elena rebuild her family's reputation can provide direction during your most challenging moments. The question isn't whether you'll encounter valleys, it's whether you'll walk through them with courage, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to your highest values. Tomorrow, we'll explore the Psalm's triumphant conclusion, where Rockefeller discovered how to prepare tables of abundance even in the presence of enemies, and how this principle can guide anyone toward lasting prosperity and peace. By 1920, 9 years after the Supreme Court had dismantled his business empire, John D. Rockefeller had achieved something unprecedented in American history. Not only had he recovered from what many considered a career-ending defeat, but he had transformed public perception from reviled monopolist to beloved philanthropist. His wealth had actually increased following the Standard Oil breakup, and his systematic giving had established foundations that would impact education, medicine, and scientific research for generations. In his private study, the 81-year-old Titan reflected on the Psalm's most remarkable promise: "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies." This wasn't mere poetic imagery to Rockefeller. It was the culmination of a strategic philosophy that had guided his entire approach to wealth building and legacy creation. The table represented abundance that transcends opposition, prosperity that benefits not just the individual but entire communities. Rockefeller had learned to prepare tables of opportunity, education, and healing, even while facing hostility from competitors, prosecutors, and public opinion. Consider James Washington, a construction worker from Detroit, Michigan, who discovered these principles during the economic uncertainty of 2023. After 20 years in the building trades, James found himself competing with younger workers willing to accept lower wages. Bitter about industry changes and resentful toward colleagues who seemed to advance more easily, James felt trapped in a cycle of frustration and declining opportunities. The transformation began when James attended a community workshop on financial literacy at his local church. The presenter mentioned Rockefeller's approach to turning opposition into opportunity, referencing the 23rd Psalm as a framework for strategic thinking. Intrigued despite his skepticism, James began researching how successful people had navigated similar challenges throughout history. James discovered that Rockefeller's table preparation philosophy wasn't about avoiding competition. It was about elevating the entire game to a level where traditional competition became irrelevant. Instead of fighting for existing opportunities, successful leaders created new opportunities that benefited multiple parties simultaneously. James began applying the table preparation principle by starting a small side business teaching construction skills to young people in his neighborhood. What began as informal mentoring evolved into a structured training program that partnered with local contractors needing skilled workers. Rather than competing directly with established training programs, James created a niche focused on practical, hands-on instruction combined with life skills and work ethic development. This approach exemplified Rockefeller's strategy of preparing tables in the presence of enemies. James's former competitors in the job market became clients for his training services. Employers who had previously viewed him as too expensive began referring young workers to his program and eventually hired him to supervise teams of graduates. Within 2 years, James had developed his small training initiative into a formal apprenticeship program, certified by state authorities and supported by major contractors. His personal income had increased substantially, but more importantly, he had created sustainable value that would continue benefiting his community for years to come. Elena Rodriguez from Austin had applied similar principles after her restaurant crisis, preparing a table of community service that transformed critics into supporters. Michael Chen in Seattle had used the concept to advance his tech career by creating educational content that helped other developers. Sarah Martinez in Phoenix had prepared her table by transforming her experience as a struggling single mother into advocacy work that helped other families access resources and opportunities. The Psalm's final promise, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life," represented the natural consequence of consistently preparing tables for others. Rockefeller had discovered that genuine abundance comes not from accumulating resources for personal consumption, but from creating systems that generate ongoing value for multiple beneficiaries. This approach had established his legacy as one of history's most influential philanthropists. The 5-step application process that emerged from these stories provides a practical framework. First, identify areas where your skills can create value for others. Second, develop partnerships that transform competitors into collaborators. Third, focus on solutions that benefit multiple parties simultaneously. Fourth, maintain consistency and integrity even when facing opposition. Fifth, measure success by long-term impact rather than immediate personal gain. As you consider your own journey toward greater abundance, remember that the most enduring tables are built through service, innovation, and consistent commitment to creating value for others. The same principles that guided Rockefeller from controversial businessman to beloved philanthropist can guide you toward prosperity that enriches not just your own life but the lives of everyone around your table. Prosperity begins in the mind, flourishes in the heart, and manifests in the world through consistent application of timeless principles that transform individual success into collective abundance.